this is honoring Ma. Everybody who came here, who knew her, came here because they want to honor her. Those of you who never knew her will only get the slightest sense of how important she was to all of us. So those of you who came up to speak, speak. Don't make it too long, but make sure you say what you really want to say. At the end of the categories, we have 6 categories. From Ruth becoming Ma, the ashram, Santa Cruz, different categories, and they'll come up as slide cards like this. It doesn't mean you have to stick to anything. Just share your heart and appreciate what people are sharing with us. Everybody who knew Ma should contribute to tonight. It's just so important for the future history and for our hearts. Putting this slideshow together and reaching out to people really was important for me. This is from Raja.
Hi, this is Raja Youngerman. I wanted to give a few little stories about Ma Renu. In my childhood, when I was in about 10th grade, I had been on sabbatical with my parents in France, and Ma Renu graciously allowed me to come and stay with them in Sea Ranch for the summer. And when I arrived, I would hang out with Babaji, and he wanted to have a little bit of fun and felt like he wanted some action. I think we were kind of buddies, and so he suggested that we go hitchhiking, and he was going to make a sign, and he wanted to go over to Highway 1 and go for a little adventure. And I thought about it. It seemed like it would be great fun, but I knew that I would get in trouble with Ma, so I had to break it to Babaji that no, we can't do that. And then later that summer, they were going to go to a retreat at Lama in New Mexico, and there was only room in the car for 4 of them, and that was already spoken for. But I was hoping that maybe we could fit in a 5th. So I schemed with Babaji on this, and he had the idea to make a little sign that said, "Go to Lama." And then we found a sheet, and I got in front and Babaji in back, and I put the sign over my head underneath the sheet, and we wandered around like this kind of lumpy thing. And when we saw Ma there in the back of the house at Sea Ranch, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we only have room for the back of that camel." So the scheme didn't work.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I know Ma would be so touched, as I am, and my daughter Gwen, my husband Govind, all of us. This family is really can't conceive our lives without Ma, obviously. So when Ma was, well, let's see, when I spoke at her after her Shraddha here, do you guys, any of you remember that? And I said I thought that she had at least 3 lifetimes that she had lived, and maybe she was just, on her way to samadhi or something faster if she got rid of a few lifetimes. Anyway, she she was one of 3 sisters born in Chicago, and so she's a Chicago girl, and she went to Northwestern in English literature, so she was a very good writer and editor, which came in useful for Babaji when he was putting out some books. So she was very interested and happy to do that part of that role, I think. Anyway, so there were 3 sisters. She was the middle sister, and she had herself 3 children. And when my parents separated, she was on her own raising 3 kids. So that was a little difficult, I'm sure. And what she decided to do was, she was basically a really fine artist, a sculptor, and she knew how to weld and work with stone and carve wood and all kinds of different things. So she thought, well, should I cut hair? Should I do this? What can I do that will give me a salary to raise my kids? So then she thought, no, I'd much rather go to back to school and get an MFA in art, which is what she did. And she, that way she was able to apply to universities and for a teaching job, which is what she had never done before. And she applied and was taken by UC Davis, which some of you know that was an extraordinary art school. And I think my mother helped make it more extraordinary, of course. And so she was able to get a job, which became a tenured position eventually. And she brought all of her 3 kids to Davis, California. And I was 10 years old. This was 1959 when we arrived in California. So this is her one of her latest sculptures. This is a tree that has been cut down, and she has encased it in plastic because she saw people chopping down the orchards in Davis to make more space for housing and stores. So she saved the wood and created a beautiful sculpture that was a kind of revitalized tree. Oh, and this is her with her very early works. She had also won a big prize in Chicago before she got hired at Davis for the best sculpture at the Art Institute. So there you see, and here she is working with some of her students. And I've talked to many of her former students. Not too many are alive anymore, but the ones who did have her were incredibly grateful to see a woman professor and sculptor. I think she was the first woman sculptor in the whole UC system, all statewide. So that was amazing. There were painters and some art education people, but I think she was the only sculptor. So, so we've gone from Chicago girl to Davis professor, and she also was a pretty good mother, I'd say. We did have to help with things. Oh, here's us in the Chicago days. That's me on the right. That's Walter, who some of you have met. And there's my brother Bill, who is tied for me always with Babaji's arrival, because he died suddenly a week before Babaji arrived. And my mother, all of us were very upset, but there was something fantastic about Babaji. He's so fearless about death. That was exactly what my mother needed to see and hear and feel 1 week after his death, when Babaji arrived on Valentine's Day in February 1971. Maybe it's time for Dharani or somebody to talk about Ruth becoming Ma Renu.
Well, becoming Ma Renu, I guess that was happening at Sea Ranch when Babaji arrived. I must say it must have been quite a change at Sea Ranch to have this little brown guy with very long hair and things like that. And I think Ma, at that time, it was just a perfect arrival and a perfect person to come into her life. And it was about this time that I also arrived in California. So that was the first time I saw Ma and Babaji, was in that period of time. And I think there are some other photographs we have showing the wonderful house. And Sea Ranch at the time in the 70s was not a very populated community. It was a lot of second homes and some artists, people retired. So it's a very quiet place, lots of beach and what have you. So it was probably much different today. So when Babaji arrived, it was very quiet. And apart from Mahendra, Vandana, Raja, friends like that, there wasn't that much activity, so it was a good time to acclimatize himself. And I know that they take excursions and do sort of dark talks, things like that, in the local community. And these are some early Mahendra, and they were very pivotal in getting Babaji, as everybody probably knows the story, getting Babaji over here, Ma sponsoring him. Mahendra and Vandana and a few others made a few trips to India. I know when they're going to, at least Mahendra, when he's going to UC Santa Cruz, he had first heard about Babaji through Prem Das, and things like that, and went in search of him. And from what I remember, they found Babaji and said, "Can you come to America with us?" And Babaji declined. He wasn't quite ready or whatever it was. But Mahendra did say that when he approached Babaji, Babaji said, "Where have you been?" as if he was expecting Mahendra. So Mahendra came back to America and spoke with Ma, I believe, to see if she would sponsor Babaji. And then Mahendra and Vandana went back to India and got Babaji and brought him over. And I think they probably arrived sometime 71, maybe towards Christmas, something like that. That time, I'm not sure about that. Maybe Archana has a better idea of the timing. And so that's when he arrived, and that's sort of how he arrived. And I think, I first heard of Babaji through the publication Be Here Now. That was way back in the late 60s, early 70s. And I remember vaguely talking about a teacher that was silent and things like that. So that was in, I think, a few people's minds, but not quite knowing exactly where he was. So here's a lot of those mentioned earlier.
And Raja is Mahendra's brother.
Is the younger brother, yes. Yes. So the family, and I think the family relationship to Ma, am I correct in this, Archana, was through Bandana, whose parents were friends.
Well, it's a long story. I'll try to condense it. We're talking about Davis families, and
Okay.
my mother was very close to Bandana's mother. I think they met in the home ec department that I told you about, because she was a researcher, a chemist.
Okay.
And And so they were very close. And then, so since the families were often together, I was close to Vandana. And Mahendra's parents were also from Davis.
Oh, we're okay.
So all of these people, we were in school together and so on. But when Mahendra and Vandana first said they wanted to go to India to find Baba Haridas, their parents just were a little bit, they weren't 21 or anything. They were still in early college. And the only person who seemed to believe it was a good idea was Ma Renu, because she wasn't called that then, but Ruth. And Ruth said, I think it's a good thing that they go, and I can write a letter supporting your visas. So she helped them get their visas to go to India. Then they would write her from India and tell them what they were learning. And she got so excited about what Babaji was teaching them that she, was very open when they finally wrote and said, we think Babaji is ready to come to America. We've given up our housing. We don't have any place to put him. We really can't ask our parents, is there any chance you could house him for a couple of months or something until we get him situated? And my mom said, of course, that'd be fine. And then Babaji had a dream. I don't know how many of you know this story. He dreamt about a blonde-haired lady artist who lived by the sea.
Right.
And said, oh, she is a good woman. She will take care of me. And so that's exactly what happened. But Babaji didn't actually arrive until February 14th, which was 1 week after my brother died.
Okay.
So she went from the funeral in February.
That was 71?
71, yeah.
Okay.
And then she drove down to the airport with Mahendra. He stayed with her because we were very worried of having her all by herself after that terrible tragedy. And then, as I say, Babaji came out, and he and Mahendra went through customs, and the customs people said, well, what brings you, Mr. Das, to California? And so he took his slate out, and you all remember that, and he wrote, God's plan. And they were a little shocked, but they let him in. So he did have an appropriate visa, thanks to Ma.
Yeah, the Sea Ranch on the beach.
So another person who was at UC Davis when Ruth was me. I was a professor in the political science department. She was a professor in the art department. And those of you who know what universities are like know that social sciences and art never meet. They're two separate universes. My memory is that the book Be Here Now speaks about the teacher, not a guru, but a teacher who taught methods and so on, not a giver of eternal wisdom and so on, but a teacher who taught methods. And that Vandana and Mahendra read that, saw that, and thought it would be neat to go to India and seek out this teacher. And they did. And two miracles occurred from my point of view. One is Babaji, who had never left India before, had reached a point in his life. There are the stages of development of any person seeking enlightenment. He had reached a point in his life where you go where you are asked to go. And at that point, they asked him to go to the United States, halfway around the world. And he had never been outside of India before, and he said yes. That, in my mind, is the first miracle that occurred. The second miracle was that when they wrote back to Ma and said, Ruth, and said, this is here to happen. Would you sponsor? Would you support? He can't come unless someone guarantees his financial and health and so on welfare. Would you be responsible for all of that? And that's the second miracle from my point of view, is that she, just on the basis of what she was hearing, but more a deep intuition she had, a kind of leap of, call it faith or insight or whatever, she just said yes. And that, in my mind, is the second miracle, that someone would take on all that she took on without ever having met this little Indian guy, just on the basis of having heard and having some sense in her. That to me is a miracle, that she had a sense. And because of her intuition, or like I say, for me, the second miracle, everything else followed. And we're here today because she had that leap. She had that faith. Whenever I think of Ma, I feel such awe and gratitude that she took that all on, and everything else since has followed that miracle.
Hi. My name's Chris Lyons, or Ramajoti, and I really haven't been able to take my eyes off this picture because that's an image. I mean, I almost think I was there. I might have been there at that particular point, but you know, when I think about this woman, I really think about three different people, in that when I first met her, I met her as my roommate, my dorm mate, my good friend, Barbara Horstein's mom. That's what she was. She was a mom. And I had the pleasure of being able to go to Davis a few times. Partly it was in relationship to kind of carpooling from where my family lived and spending more time with Barbara. And I saw her, and so this would have been 68 and 69. And I was in awe of her. She was a super professional person, both in terms of her responsibilities in the art department and in terms of her artwork. I really looked up to her, and had lots of friends, and she was very avant-garde in terms of the art that she did. And I did learn a lot about her from Barbara, too. Barbara, it was clear that how much Barbara respected her and cared for her. And then I had the benefit of going with Barbara to Sea Ranch in 1971. And it was just us, and I can't remember anybody else, other people there, other than Ma and Babaji. And Ma she was a different in a lot of ways. She was calmer. She was very focused. She had still a lot of strength. And she took care of us. You know, she took care of us. She wanted us, but she wasn't at all pushy in any particular way. And I have in a cookbook I put together the pancakes that she made. And they had cornmeal in them, and Babaji called them pain cakes. And she made the explanation that he called them pain cakes, especially because of the syrup we put on top. And I think I went at least twice there. And then because of growing family and the growth of Mount Madonna Center, et cetera, and her involvement with that, I really didn't end up having a connection with her until she was here, you know, and she was teaching, and she was a consistent presence. And yet I felt like I had a history going back with her, too. But what I saw with her continually over the many years then that happens in 1975 on was just this still strength about her and wisdom. And that wisdom is with me, still with me today. Even though I was never a student of hers, and my husband was for multiple classes or multiple sessions, and how much I heard about her through those sessions, but that is what I carry with me, and a sense of gratitude too, as Brajesh mentioned, in terms of her role here at Mount Madonna Center. But and then I feel gratitude for Sudhir Das for putting this on and giving people a chance to have these memories, and other people that have supported him and have a long history too.
Thanks, Ramajyoti. Just to underline a little bit of Babaji meeting Ma, or Ma meeting Babaji, when she told me the story of meeting him, she said that, you know, when it used to be that, like Archana said, you needed a kind of a sponsor to get a visa to go to India. And Ma told me that she was in a period of her life where she was asking the big questions. You know, her child died and she had all this success as a sculptor and in the world and her reputation and all of that, and yet all this tragedy came to her. And then when she said she started getting letters from Mahendra and Bandana, because it was because of them that it was because of her that they got to go, she said that when they started writing about being with Babaji, that it was like being with an angel, and that he was teaching them about love. And she said, and then I got a letter that said their visa was about to be up. They had to come back to the States. And they were so in love with Babaji that they couldn't bear to leave him behind. And if they could get a visa for him to visit, would she give him a place to stay for a visit? And she said, I found myself saying yes. And then I asked her, well, what did you think when you first saw him at the airport, when you went to go pick him up at the airport? She said, honestly, the first thing? I said, yeah. She said, oh my God, what are my friends gonna think? She said, because I saw this little man in rubber flip-flops with a huge pile of hair on his head. And she said, I drove a Porsche. I gave cocktail parties, you know? Yeah. And he was wearing a skirt, his dhoti. And she said, then I looked in his eyes. And I knew that all of those big questions that I needed answers for, whatever I needed to know, he was going to be able to teach me.
I'd like to just say that, Bonnie, when you mentioned the little man with the hair piled up on his head, I first saw Babaji and Ma together in Mendocino, a few miles north of Sea Ranch. And it was at a commune called Village Oz. And Babaji and Ma were on a raised platform. And at those days, I was long-haired, hippie, and it was a social event. I had no idea that Babaji would be there, or Ma. So when I came into the commune and saw the stage, saw the two of them sitting there, it was just sort of like they landed from another planet. I just visually couldn't compute that there he was. I mean, I thought I had long hair. He had this big pile of hair on top, and Ma was sitting there looking very Western and coiffed and looking beautiful, sitting on this platform. And it was just like, you know, you read about early people on an island in Hawaii or something, and see a sailboat coming, it's Columbus or something. They have no idea what they're looking at. I sort of felt a bit that way. I just had no idea what to expect or anything like that. But just visually, it just stopped me. And then I looked at Babaji, and there's just something about that first connection, the eyes or whatever, that just stayed with me. And 3 years later, I was at Robles knocking on the door. Yeah, but it was quite a sight.
I want to say that the story Ma told me was that in the weeks leading up to Babaji's arrival, she started having these kind of dreams that he would get off the plane in a three-piece suit because she was so worried about what her colleagues would say. And you know, like Vani said, she had a Porsche and was giving cocktail parties. And so she had these great dreams of the three-piece suit and you know, can see what arrived on the plane. It was very entertaining. The other thing that I always remember Ma told me, very similar to what Bhavani said, is in the car when Babaji was in the car with Ma, somebody told him about her son passing away. And she told me he looked at her with such total compassion, those eyes. And at that point, she said, "I want to learn what you know."
Mm.
Maybe to add to that, another variation of the story of the meeting. And Archer and I didn't know that your brother died a week before. But I do know that Ma had a certain amount of fame and some loss. And so I think it primed her to meet him and be so receptive. But what she told me is that when she looked in his eyes, she knew he knew what she needed to know.
That's what she told me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then a surrender happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's Ma on the left, and Babaji and Badri and Ratna, and I don't know the other lady.
Audrey's mom.
Oh,
It's
okay.
when she came to visit us and we brought her up to Robles to meet Babaji.
And Radha and Jaya. Jaya. Anybody here or there that day?
I was just going to comment, though, that picture where Babaji was teaching outside, but it's really just a large group of us learning with him. Yeah, that one. And you can see Ma, who is also helping and teaching. You can see AG is facing us at the back with the headband.
And Sharda, this is up at Robles, isn't it? Out, yeah, under the trees.
Ma taught art at the children's school at Mount Madonna School. She taught for years. So it's pretty amazing for those kids to have an art professor teaching their art class. In Ma's living room, I think Mohan was there. Ma was older, not well at that time, and a group of her devotees came to see her.
I'm sorry that there isn't somebody from this period.
I think this is Laney's barn, but I'm not sure. Yeah, and Babaji hadn't, this is early, you can tell Babaji still had his jata.
Mitra's in another version of this picture.
Babaji did yagya. I think that one is at Ma's house.
Look at that. Oh, wow.
This must be Mahendra and Raja's family.
Yes, that's right.
Canada. So the India travels early. Babaji went, Archana went with Ma and Babaji very early, like 74, wasn't it? Archana?
Yeah, it was actually the end of 73 and the beginning of 74. So it was a 6-month period. And Mahendra and Vandana came for at least 2 of those months. And then I traveled with just Ma and Babaji for 3 or 4 months almost. So we could fit in one taxi, which was really helpful. And of course, I saw so much of northern India through their eyes. And there were a lot of amazing things that happened, including that was a trip where they were looking for the land for Sri Ramashram, but didn't succeed in that trip. But they looked at a lot of places. And also, at Shivaratri, Babaji sacrificed his jata to the Ganga. And you can't, I don't know how many of you know that when you take a vow as a monk, you can't use scissors to cut your hair. So Ma and I had to break it. And we were absolutely, he was in agony from our breaking his hair and trying to, it was all matted too, so it was hard to get it off. But we spent the whole night, breaking off the jeta, and then he threw it into the Ganga with some ceremony. And then a whole bunch of his students came to see him the next day. This was during, I think it was also the Kumbh Mela at the same time. So there were people, millions of people in this small town of Haridwar. And so, and I asked him, I said, Babaji, nobody's mentioned you got rid of your jeta, And he said, well, when Americans see me, they just see the hair. They just see the jeta. When Indians see me, they don't notice. They just look at me. Yeah. So that was a... Was that hardware? I'm not sure. It didn't look like hardware to me. But there were many towns we visited.
Did you go to Benares?
We did go to Benares.
It looks like Benares.
Yeah, it could easily be Benares. So another major thing that happened to Ma through Babaji is the very first day we got to India, he was going to see his sister who had developed into a kind of devotee of Babaji's. And no longer, didn't really think of her as his sister anymore, but that's what she was. And she had been a bit ill, and so he thought he should go right away. This was in Delhi, where we arrived with the plane, as many of you have done. And when we arrived there, he asked Ma to come with him to visit his sister. and his sister, and they were talking very lively, very good conversation, and then, she was talking about how she was getting old and death was coming and so on, and he said, well, I'm ready anytime to go. I have no fear of death. I totally accept it. And she then bowed to Babaji. She bowed, put her hands together and said, not you, me. And she died that moment in front of Ma and Babaji. And she went, peacefully. She was so happy to see Babaji. And, but that was just a major event in my mother's life, because that someone could send themselves off like that. And and then Babaji made her come to the burning ghat and send her off. But women weren't allowed to go to the burning ghat in New Delhi. So he made it possible somehow. And she had to take photographs, he told her. But it really wasn't about the photographs. It was about her facing death more directly, I think.
Ratna?
Yeah, so I guess this was the trip to India right after that, because this was, I think, 1977.
76.
And we went for the Mahakumbha Mela in Allahabad, but this is Calcutta. But so that was my first trip to India. That's me and the bandana. And Jaya went, Ma had invited Jaya, I'm sorry she's not here, she had tried to be, but Ma had invited Jaya to come as her companion. And Badri and I had always wanted to go to India and asked Babaji if we could come with him. And he was very gracious and inviting. Ma was a little nervous because at the time there was a lot of, she wasn't sure how a group of Americans would be received traveling with Babaji in India. The other two men there, Shamdas, who was in the last picture, and Madhab, were with us in and out. They were traveling on their own, and sometimes they joined us. But as soon as we got to the airport in Delhi, and we were at the going through customs, and Badri and I made a point to separate ourselves from them and to be really separate. And Babaji just walked right over to me and handed me his passport and said, let's go through customs, kind of thing. So I think Ma had a lot of surrendering to do that trip, because I think she was hoping it would be just another small, intimate trip with Babaji, and it turned out to be 6 or 7 of us. One of the big highlights of that trip was we traveled with Mataji. I don't know if there's any pictures of her in there, but she was a woman who knew Babaji when he was a little boy, and she took care of him. And she taught me, like that trip, I'd known Babaji about 4 years or 5 years on that trip, and she was so devoted, and she followed him everywhere. And even walking to Allahabad, which was in the Guinness World Book of Records for the greatest gathering of the world, he would hold her hand, she would stare at him, she would do mantra behind him, and you could tell, or I could tell, that this is what it means to be one-pointed, one-focused. And so Ma, whenever she would cook for Babaji, would cook extra food, knowing that Mataji would only eat prasad because she was a Brahmin woman, and when we were traveling, she wouldn't eat, from the restaurants or the stands or if anybody else cooked for her. So, and Babaji would always give her, food from his plate, leftover food. That picture's in Calcutta. This was a trip where Babaji was also looking for land. He hadn't found it yet, so we went up north to, northern India, and then we went down south to Calcutta, everything by train, like overnight trains. And he was also visiting disciples at the time. So this was at the Malik family, and we would crowd into their tiny, tiny little living room, their neighbors' friends, maybe 30, 40 people, and he would just be up till all hours of the night, speaking in Bengali with everyone. I remember the women would have their dinner like 11 or 12 o'clock at night after they served everyone else. And poor Ma, they had a very small house, and she had to sleep in a bed with Jaya and me. Like the three of us were just all crowded into this one bed in this one room for many nights. And then the same thing wherever we traveled. We just always had small spaces. I think the most fun was the one in Allahabad at the Kumbh Mela. We got there like 2 a.m. from the train, and apparently none of us had made reservations to stay anywhere. And so Babaji said, I'll find a place. And he took the men with him, which were those 3 men in the picture, and he told the women, which was Mataji, Ma, and Jaya and me, to wait here. And here meant by a burning trash can with with a crowd of other Indians around for warmth. Well, they walked, I don't know where, but they came back like an hour later, and Babaji seemed really excited, and he said, we found a place, and he took us all to this. We walked for about another half hour. It was about 4 a.m. by now, and it was this rundown, 2-story. There was a sink outside on the ground floor and one outside toilet, which we realized we were going to share with all the people staying on the ground level. And then he found one room for all 9 of us, and we all put out our sleeping bags in a row like sardines in this one tiny little room on the top. And Ma just looked at me and she said, this is India, you know. And it was just, you know, I was young, Ma was in her 50s, so I can imagine now what that was like for her. But Mataji was ageless, 60s maybe, I don't know. So that's also in Calcutta. The only other quick story about Ma in this was, in those days you can see we're in saris, and the suits that you see the women wearing now and that a lot of women are wearing, that's the Malik family that we visited, that we stayed with. So Babaji wanted all of us to always wear saris. And Ma was very into the Gandhi ashram and the khadi and the homespun. And it was really important to her that we wear those kind of cloth. And so she took me to a Gandhi ashram store and was very, even though I liked some other things, she was very insistent that we get the homespun. She dressed me in that, put that on. It was one of the first times I ever wore a sari. I came out and said to Babaji, look, you know, I'm in a sari. And he took one look at me and he said, you look like a gauze bandage. That was my big sari experience. So.
Sorry.
And that's us walking to the Kumbh Mela, and there's Mataji. And so that was the crowd that we were in, that we walked for miles. And we eventually did make it to the Ganga and took our dips and did all the other things that you do at the river. And yeah, there's lots of stories from that time.
Wow.
But I know we need to move on.
Yeah, I have a Mataji story too. When we were on that 6-month trip, we hooked up with Mataji for part of it. And Babaji asked her if there was anything she wanted, because she was getting older, you know. And she said she wanted to have darshan of the ocean. She'd never been to the sea or the water. So we arranged to go to Puri and to take her, and she was in total ecstasy to be on the beach in Puri. And the other thing I learned about Babaji in all this is that he understood about 10 languages. I don't know if you all understand what a mind he had. He could, you know, so yes, he could do both Urdu and Hindi. I mean, he was obviously just writing most of the time, but he understood and communicated in Bangladeshi, Orissa, English, Bengali. Anyway, I counted it once again, added up to 10. So we were in all these different environments, Kumon, of course. We were in these different environments, and he could react and write in the script of all of these different environments. So that was amazing.
Oh, just one other quick thing from their Ma's mantra from that trip, and then she said it pretty, and since then I traveled probably 20 or 30 years with her to India, and that trip where she began that mantra, she said, oh, India is hurry and wait. And that was like the mantra, you'd hurry to go somewhere, and then you'd have to wait because the plane would be late, the train would be late, the people wouldn't be there, but you would rush really hard to get there on time. So that's my mantra from Ma, hurry and wait.
So that is Prabha, who's working at Stanford now as a nurse. This is Sri Ram Ashram. Babaji had always said, and as were the last few photos, he had always said that with the profits of his books, he wanted to start a home for abandoned children where they would be treated with love and respect. The impetus of that was a friend of his as a child who lived in an ashram with his mother, who was the sweeper, and the Swamiji of that ashram was very abusive to the children. So, as Ma told me, that was back when you thought you made money from books, of which she then learned that you don't. So Ma actually gave seed money, and in one of those previous trips, they created Anat Shishupal Trust of India, which is the formal name of Sri Ram Ashram. And it sat there with a little seed money in it. And Babaji went back periodically to look for land. I went with Babaji in '83, and I would have never gone except that Ma paved the way for me. She actually, I got a phone call saying, Ma wants to talk to you, and I called on the payphone. I got a message, Ma wants to talk to you. I called on the payphone at the seminar house, and she said, guess what, you get to go to India. Babaji said you can go. And at that point, we had heard he didn't want Westerners because we jacked the prices up. And I had kind of casually told Ma, well, I'd love to go to India, but I've always wanted to go, but I won't go because Babaji doesn't want people. It was not true. I'd never wanted to go to India. It was a good conversation piece. And be careful about your conversation pieces, because she took it seriously, and next thing I knew, I was going to India. In '83, we looked for the property, did not find the property. In '84, Babaji went back and found Sri Ram Ashram. Ma continued, is that me? Oh my God. Wow, I'm a little blown away here. Where'd you get that? I didn't give that to you. Is that Masuri?
Looks like it.
It's either Masuri or the Kumon. Oh, Kashani, okay, yeah. Did you go to the Kumon? Yeah, we went to the Kumon in '83. So Ma every year came with Babaji. At that point, he would go for 3 months every year. I remember my mother saying to me, Ma has really given her life to this. And I said that to Ma, and she said, this is my life. Mm-hmm. I always remembered that story. In '88, we went and we had our first children, Puja Rama. That's one word, Puja Rama. And Rama was very, very sick. She was a couple months old. We thought she was going to die, and they were telling us she was all better, that she was worse. Ma took it on herself to bring Rama back to life. She trained the nurses and the mothers in how to feed her properly. And by the end of those 3 months, we had realized that Rama was fine. Is that the monkey night?
Yes, this is going to be the monkey series
Okay,
of
so
some-
we're
and
sitting in
Rashmi-
Babaji's room. Yeah, I was there. Sitting in Babaji's room, Madhab White, who passed away this past year, he used to do these animal calls. So he was doing his animal calls, and somebody said, "Ma, do your monkey."
Babaji said.
Babaji did, okay. And none of us actually knew what that meant. And Ma's like, no, 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 no. And then she goes, oh, okay. And she turns around and puts her back to us. And she turns back around and faces us, and she was she had turned into a monkey. It was like the most stunning thing. Yeah, look at that. It was just remarkable. We were all just shocked and couldn't stop laughing, but we're just shocked. I mean, it was almost unreal, how she did
The whole
that.
thing with her arms and her hands under her.
It was an embodiment. And I'd like to say that after that, Sita did her camel, which was also quite good.
So can I just add that Ma did that when we were to her 3 children?
When you were a child, she would do that?
She would do the monkey, yeah. And we were in hysterics whenever she did it.
I'll never forget it. The moment she turned around and we saw it, it was like embodiment. It was amazing. When Babaji would arrive, there'd always be an arrival ceremony, and Ma also was honored as the mother of the ashram.
What's the story on this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
People would send things through different people would arrive at different times throughout the 3-month trip in India, and people would send things for Babaji, and I believe this was from Mandira Haynes,
Oh, God, that's right.
who sent both men and women's underwear this large. And Ma was opening up the package to show what Mandira had sent to Babaji.
Ma would come to India, and from the very first day till the day she left, she would work. She spent her 70th birthday cleaning cow dung off of a wall, and would take care of the children, make sure that they were dressed properly. I got in trouble, apparently my standard of dress was, for the children, was not up to par. She made sure that they started a little school for them well before they went to any formal school, and did art projects with them. She was known as Renu Ma, as Babaji was known as Hari Das Baba. That's not by the kids, but by other people. The kids called Ma Renu Renu Ma.
Gwen, do you have a little story about breakfast?
Oh, well, I don't remember it as well as I should, because I think I was 6 when I first went to India, and that was Ma's last trip, and I think that was what prompted us for going. And so Ma decided that I would eat breakfast with her every morning. Is that right, Mom? So I really just remember there's a couple photographs of me kind of like coyly showing toast to the photographer, and Ma sitting there very graciously. I was telling Sudhir earlier today that I think when I was little, I was kind of constantly trying to explain Ma and Babaji to my school friends, my parents' friends. Like, I just didn't really know, they were really curious about Ma and Babaji's relationship and would ask, like, well, what, are they married? Like, what's going on? And so it was this kind of weird territory for me for a long time, something that was very special to me privately, but that I think when I was really little was kind of a fun fact. And then when I was kind of high school and college age was kind of too hard. It was kind of, I felt rightly or wrongly that I was, I couldn't really explain it in a way that came off to my satisfaction. And so I sort of stopped talking about Ma and Babaji for a long time. And I think just privately, I grew up with a bunch of artists, and you know, my mom's an artist, Ma was an artist, and I think I struggled for a long time with Ma's decision to stop making, or this, I don't know if it was decision so much, but her sort of shift when she met Babaji from, oh wow, you know, you have this art, you had it made, Ma, like what's going on? You know, teaching at this big art school, having all these big shows, and that there was this kind of loss of self that I think I was, you know, grateful for because of all that it had brought, but would not have chosen for myself. And I think something that I've come to see really in the last couple of years is how, yeah, I guess similar to what Rashmi was saying, it was not a giving up, like a giving of life, it was her life. Like there wasn't a gap or a letting go, like it was such a deep continuation of her work. And there really is nothing bigger or deeper than the kinds of communities she built. Basically everyone who meets me at Mount Madonna, once we recognize each other, and I embarrassingly, you know, ask you to remind me of your name, and some people usually say, "Oh, Ma was like a mom to me," and so just honoring everyone who's in this room, who's many of you who've said that to me. I think especially the women that I know. She, Bhavani was talking about Ma's finishing school for girls. That Ma would sort of, I mean, maybe you can chime in here how she sort of cared for you guys and helped you out.
Well, I'm not sure if this is a Leonard Street. Okay, so what Anjali's and Gwen is talking about is Ma's house in Santa Cruz that she owned. And many of us passed through Leonard Street, but when I moved there, Ratna moved in at the same time, as well as Vishnu Priya, who's no longer with us, Vishnu Ma. They left shortly after moving in to other parts of their lives. And then the finishing, when we called it Ma's, the Leonard Street Finishing School for Girls was when Kalpana moved in. She was younger than me. I was 19, and Savita was 16. And Babaji would come. Well, at this time, we didn't have Mount Madonna Center yet, and we didn't have PCC. There were satsang houses. You know, we were mostly college students or people starting their young families, and so we lived in different places in the Santa Cruz area. And so a lot of things happened at Leonard Street, which was this old house in downtown Santa Cruz that Ma owned. And Mahendra and Bandana moved there when they first came back from India. And AD, Anand Das, was giving classes at the university because he started a club called Namaste Club, because if you started a club, you could use the facilities. So there were these, and Babaji would come to visit AD's classes, you know, before Ma and Babaji moved in 1974 to Robles. Mahendra and Bandana had just broken up when I moved into Leonard Street, and I was a college student, and Gautam was interviewing people to live in the house, and he said, do you do anything on Tuesdays? Do you go to school on Tuesdays? I said, no. And he said, all right, well, then you can run Babaji's personal appointments. So Babaji had personal appointments on Tuesdays, and we used to get to hang out with him for an hour before the appointment started, and again another time at the end of the day before Ma came to pick him up. They were just wonderful times. But the finishing school for girls, because I was the oldest at 19 or 20 maybe by that point, was that Ma, we used to refer to Ma's gentle reminders. She had gentle reminders about going to India. She had gentle reminders about everything. And she would say, you know, offer a chair to the elders, offer them something to eat or drink. You know, this floor needs sweeping, turn out the lights. So really, Ma was a second mother to so many of us. You know, we didn't think we were children, but we still were. And when I was thinking about it earlier today, I was trying to come up with a few adjectives about Ma. She was elegant and earthy, generous and guileless, down to earth and delightful. She had a delightful sense of humor. And then there were sometimes she could be extremely, the down-to-earth part. She had a look, the ice blue look of her eyes when you were messing up, that you absolutely knew that you were getting a not gentle reminder from Ma to get it together. So, yeah, what to say? The times that I spent most of the time with Ma was at Salt Spring Island. You know, she came here with Babaji when she visited the days of the center, but I didn't really have an opportunity to get to hang out with her that much, but she was a great hiker and walker. She loved to hike and walk in nature. And I shamelessly just asked if I could go along when she wanted to go for a hike or a walk on Salt Spring and all the beautiful places that I know on this beautiful island where we have a small sister community are because of Ma. And it was actually on Salt Spring that she told me the story at the Indian Reserve of how she met Babaji. So that's a little bit.
I'd like to share my most intimate memory of Ma, to give you an example of the mothering. Like, I felt Ma was my mother. Archana had to share a lot, as did Gwen. When I was in India, I had to have an emergency surgery. And let me tell you, I won't tell you the details, but it was utterly terrifying in a small little provincial hospital. And it was like nothing you'd want to go through. They did the surgery in my street clothes, and I had a bedpan. That's all I'm going to say, because it could get gross. Ma cut off my clothes when I was finally allowed her to. She had this little teeny scissors that were these travel scissors, you unfolded them, they were about 2 inches. I kept going, I'm not ready, Ma. And then it was finally ready, and I turned around, and she had her scissors out, and, was looking at me like, we're gonna have to do this now. And I go, okay, go for it. She cut off the clothes, and she washed me. And that was the level that Ma went to for us. She bathed me. And I couldn't move.
Well, you're reminding me, Rashmi, of a time after I had a surgery that Ma came to visit me, and she so gently fed me spoon by spoon my soup. And I guess I'll talk now about my time at Robles. Like 1989, I was in graduate school and finishing up, and I saw Babaji down here for a visit. And Babaji, when I walked into the room, he just wrote, "Moved back." Okay, I moved back. And shortly after that, Sharda came to me and said, "Would you be interested in helping Mom at home to cook?" And that was the beginning of about 29 years there at the house. Yeah, and I thought I'd just speak a little bit about what I call the quiet years, which was the first 10 years of that time, where it was really like a sweet little nest, very contained, because not that many people came to the house. And I want to speak to some things that people have said about Ma's strength, she was just so incredibly solid in her commitment and her dedication. It makes sense that she would say, "This is my life." Because I think, and maybe it wasn't when she saw Babaji's eyes, I got a feeling like some switch was flipped in her, and that she put 100%, her whole heart, into this going towards freedom. That she'd seen the world, she'd seen fame, and she knew that didn't do it for her. And she reminded me of another Ruth, and I don't know if you'll catch this like I do, but I'm thinking of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Because, she can look kindly and even mild, but right underneath that mild, kindly face is steel. so strong, so almost unmovable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that just carried her through, and often wondered how she could do all the things at Roble Street, all the cooking, all the driving, all the everything, a task that took many people to try to even do what she did alone. And I had a feeling it was because she was so committed. It was just a decision that had been made. And so she didn't have to fool around with indecision. It was just done. So I got to witness that with Ma in some really beautiful ways. So I thought I'd speak a little about as Ma as Ruth to Ma, and then Ma as mom, and as Ma as meditator. Well, Ma had the job of kind of guarding Babaji's solitude. So she had such a range of ways she could be. She could be the very gracious host. And we're hearing how she really had a sense of what is proper, which she really tried to teach us unruly hippies something about being proper. But she could be this gracious host, and she could also be a real formidable bouncer. And she had this way of saying no, that you just knew it was no. And she would often say, "That won't be necessary." And I was like, okay, case closed, got it. And I did receive what Babani called, the look. We just called it the look. And she would bring that out when needed. So she is definitely serious. It's the most intentional person I think I've ever had close contact with in her way. I remember she had me drive her to Berkeley when Archana was going to give birth. And you think, okay, we're just going to drive together, no pre-planning. But no, I get in the car. She says, "Now I'm going to tell you the story of." And it seemed like she just had lesson plans for so many of us. In this finishing school, she once looked at me and she, with a little glee, said, "You're one of my projects." Yeah, and it's just like, okay. I think it was a dubious honor because there's definitely a recognition of need for improvement. But I also know there's other people in this very room that were also her projects. So we had a time for laughter. And we, when I first started helping Ma, I just cook a little bit, but it morphed into me cooking meals, and we'd share our meals and watch TV. And that was Babaji's way of visiting with Ma. And we would watch funny things. And he really liked this terrible show, Are You Being Served? It was an English show. And Ma and I, we'd roll our eyes like, oh gosh, he likes it. So we'll watch it with him and watch him laugh. But there was this one scene in there where the character was just telling everybody, "You're all doing very well." And it was shortly after that Ma and I were here in that room, and I think it was before some holiday, and people were doing the flowers. And Ma, with a little mirth, looked at everybody and said, "You're all doing very well." But no one took it as a joke. They just all beamed. "Oh, good, we're all doing very well." So she did have that sense of humor.
Okay.
Well, at Robles, Ma had her hands filled because it was such a hub of activity, of people coming and going, and a lot of people arriving because they wanted to see Babaji. And I remember she would tell me when I was up at Robles and working in the studio, because the studio was by the upper parking lot. So she kept telling me, she says, "If you see somebody so-and-so coming in, just come out the door and intercede them and say, 'Oh, Babaji's not here today. Come back another day.'" So she used everything possible to protect him from just, being overrun.
And then if Babaji said, let them in, then she would switch and surrender and
Yes.
let that happen.
Yes.
Amsa, do you have something?
There are just so many of us. I think it's hard to imagine how many of us she had to mother. And we had the audacity to just move up to Bonnie Doon right by their house so that we could be nearby. And I felt like the cup of sugar neighbor, I was just always trying to find something to go over there for. And she was so patient with us, and yet you could get the look and know that it wasn't an appropriate time, and she really tried to show us that. But I came to her in tears and said, my mother's coming an unannounced trip, and she's coming tomorrow, and I haven't told her yet that I'm pregnant. And so she said, well, you better get married. So we just had the Gandharva ceremony next to the pond. She threw out a rug, and we invited my brother-in-law, who's a good pujari, up.
Oh my goodness.
And Ma went in and made a crazy cake, bundt cake, and Sundar and I got married. And so when I got to pick my mom at the airport, I could tell her that I got married and that I was pregnant. But she was so practical, she would just try to support you to do. I was definitely just, Ma had too much grace to roll her eyes, but I'm sure I just drove her to distraction. And she just kept, trying to just help us put the most positive self forward. And they never gave up on us, those two. They always, there was no, even though she would try to hold people at bay, they were so generous with their time. And if you knew to time it and come at 3 and have tea and have Mother Taffy cookies and windmill cookies and sit and talk, they'd find a niche, they'd find a place that you could be. And her grace and presence was overappreciated.
That story reminded me of something about Ma that I learned early. Well, we were married here in '89, and Ma very quickly, it must have been not too far into 1990, and said, "Dear," I was dear, "Dear, I want to talk to you about going to India." And I said, "Well, Ma, you don't have to ask me if you want to go to India." And she said, "No, dear. I would like to know if you want to go to India, because we have, people who go out and go to India and work at this ashram, and I can, it'd be a great time." So sure, and so I went out to India with Archana and through the whole thing, and there was something that happened that while we were there that made me understand that, well, some of you talked about intuition or farsightedness. I think she was kind of a mind reader myself. I'm not sure, but we were going in those days. Everybody who went to the work at the ashram lived in Hardwar, in a big hotel. The ashram didn't have places, and what you did every morning, or in the mornings that you wanted to do it, at least, most every morning, is you got up fairly early and went out at the edge of Hardwar there, and there were taxis that would come by and would drive people out. It was about, 5 kilometers or 5 or 6 kilometers, 10 kilometers, yeah. So it was quite a ways. But we, on this one day, Archana and me and Ma, we were out a little too late, Ma said, to get those taxis, and all that was left were these little bikes, motorized bikes, where you could sit 3 people in the back, if you were lucky, and then somebody driving on the front. And she says, but there's a problem here sometimes. These guys will say that they'll take you all the way out there, to the ashram, and they won't. They'll stop somewhere in the middle and tell you that's as far as they can go, and it's going to cost you more money if you want to go any further. She said, but don't worry, if that happens, I'll take care of it. Okay, Ma. So here comes one by, and Bob flags it down. And we get in the back, squeeze back there, and we're going through there. And sure enough, about 2/3 of the way there, the guy stops, turns off the motor, and turns around and says something in Hindi. Ma knew Hindi, of course. So she starts talking to him rather directly. And for about a couple of minutes, it was a little back and forth as to what was going on. I had no idea what was going on, but he turned and looked straight at me for about 5 or 10 seconds, and I had no idea what was happening, so I just gave him the best grin I could do, like, hey, don't. But he turned right around, started the thing, and we went on to the ashram. So when we got out, I said, Ma, what the hell happened back there? What did you say? What went on? She says, well, dear, I told him that my daughter and I were women of peace, very, very gentle, and we would mean him no harm, but she couldn't vouch for her new son-in-law, who might just beat him up.
Effective.
So this is at the ashram, and some guys brought the camels out. I don't think the kids got on them, but as you can see, Ma did. She was 71. I know this year was 1990. It was the first year I went. And so here's this lady, and many of the pictures you're seeing, she's in her 60s and 70s. And then there's this.
Oh dear. Oh.
That's the baby I was talking about. The next year. Or was that no, that was the next year. That's the baby the year that she was so sick.
So teeny.
She was very small. Like they'd put her on the roof with a towel over her, and we wouldn't see her. They go, watch out, don't step on her. And we go, where is she? And they go, pull off this little towel, and there she would be. And Ma just brought this baby back to life. She started watching every single thing they did. It was amazing to watch.
If you ever went to Ma with a problem or a criticism that you'd received or something like that, she'd look straight at you and say something like, now, what is true about that? What's the truth there? Find that out. And then move on.
I think she was so mindful in her actions and in her thoughts. She had an ability to meet the person, the moment, just as it needed to be. Always with, how can I be of help? So for you, Hamsa, it was a wedding. And she was great with worldly advice in ways that Babaji wasn't, because she had lived in the world. So she had wonderful ways to guide, how do we navigate life in the world. And even with me, she was a mom in a sweet way, and like when I was trying to date and some man wanted to take me out on this date, and she says, well, what are you going to wear? And I think my wardrobe was pretty scant there. And she just took me into her bedroom and opened the closet doors wide. And she says, let's find something. So she dressed me. And I'm getting dressed by someone decades older than I. But she just met the moments.
So this is Ma with her granddaughter, who is now sitting here,
Yeah.
speaking, Gwen. In those days, we called her Gigi. You can see that Ma is pretty happy with her.
Ma, speaking of projects, one day I was invited to be the landscape, to work at her house once a week. And, like trim the hedges and stuff. And along with that came tea time and dinner time, which I had no idea. So it's a very important part of my life. When suddenly I had this different type of relationship with both Ma and Babaji, sitting in the house, having tea time, having dinner time. And that was, Ma bringing people in at times, the project, what she felt they needed. I'm sure she could have found many people to do what I did.
Left to right, Kalpana, Ratna, Ma, Sharda.
Yeah, that was very typical in India. As Bubby said, Ma walked, and those of us that were there at the time would always, almost every day, we would take walks to the Ganga River with her and just sit there for a while and offer flowers sometimes and then just walk back. But it was pretty much a ritual for Ma and all of us that went with her.
So even though it seems like we were mishmash these last few cycles, this next one is really just a bunch of pictures. So this is the time for those of you who have a story and maybe it didn't have a place in the past to speak up and share. I know because a number of you have talked to me and I haven't heard you speak here. So when you're ready.
I was a latecomer, and I was young and dumb and distracted by all the worldly things around. I come to the center, and there's Babaji, getting used to that. I came because my love here, and getting introduced to Babaji was one thing, but noticing everything and all the people around, there was so much going on. I knew who Ma was probably, but it was years before I realized she knew a lot more about me than I knew about her. And that was a really interesting revelation, and who she was. And, hearing all this today, I really relate to what Brajesh said, the double miracle, that Babaji came and that she received him, and those two things together made this happen. Without that happening, it wouldn't have happened. And I see that her instinct to accept Babaji is the observational qualities of an artist to understand immediately that this is something to pursue. That instinct is so important to who she was, and that she had a similar kind of vision into the people around her to understand who we are, and how she was able to hold a space for Babaji and make it, give him a place of serenity within all of what was going on so that he could be around for us. And then her own personality and person as well as a double. It was just an amazing pairing. So even coming late and seeing that, I so appreciated how that came about.
Okay, anybody here who's in that picture?
I am. I'm in the photo. And this is also one of my great moments. And it started with Kopina Tabachnik, and we were sitting having lunch or breakfast or whatever. And she said, let's do a group thing for Halloween. And then she said, let's all be Babaji. And I mean, part of me was loving it and part of me was like terrified. But I decided it was okay because Ma raided Babaji's closet. And Ma got us all those clothes. And, she would tell us, he was asking where this hat was. And she'd have to navigate that. And she kept like slipping these clothes to us. It was, each of us were an aspect of Babaji, like working Babaji, something Babaji. It was a fascinating experience because I realized that Babaji actually covered a lot of himself. So, especially when he wore a hat, and people really thought that. They thought we were Babaji. I remember Brajesh coming in and saying to Babaji, Babaji, I saw you driving a car. And because we all dressed up at Jaya's house and drove down. And then another person saying, came into this building and pranam to one of us, and another one of us came in, and another one of us came in, and another one of us came in, and they were like, oh my God, Luckily, Babaji thought it was funny. I have a memory of walking in the room at dinner time, and people just didn't know whether they could laugh or not. I didn't know if we could laugh or not.
Well, and we were all keeping silent. We weren't talking.
Right.
And Babaji started trying to guess immediately who each of us was, and then he just jumped up and wanted a photo taken. So this is Rashmi's on the closest to the window, and Jaya is next to her, and then of course that's Babaji. I'm standing next to Babaji. Jeev, who's no longer with us, Jivanti, is standing next to me, and behind is Kalpana Tabachnik in the work apron. She was the working Babaji, and Rajini, who was living at, red-haired Rajini, who was living at PCC at the time. Yeah, it was and I tell you, none of us wanted to take those robes off.
Amsa?
Amsa, is that your wedding? Is it?
No.
Is it?
Okay. Somebody else can speak to this, but this was a recipe that Ma would come make for Thanksgiving, I think. Anybody work with her in the kitchen on this?
Oh, no, but I know everything about Roberta's persimmon pudding. Roberta was one of my dorm mates, along with Christina, and this is her mother's recipe. So it's really Milton and Harriet's recipe, which she gave to Roberta, and then Roberta gave it to my mother. She always wanted to have a good persimmon pudding recipe. Mm-hmm. And then, so she'd make it for big holidays for us. But then she had this idea that you guys would make it for how many people? 300 or something? Yeah. And so then she had these huge amounts. Or how the kitchen people will have to tell you how they multiplied that recipe. But that is, and I just saw a few days ago Roberta, who lives in Los Angeles, and I will tell her that her mother's persimmon pudding recipe was on the screen, and she will be thrilled.
And as I recall, there was brandy in it, even here.
It's circled.
I'm sure there was. It wouldn't be Roberta's persimmon pudding without brandy.
Oh.
This is Archana and Walter, her brother. Ma Renu's two surviving kids. hiking at Salt Spring.
Your dates, Sudhir. Will you tell about your dates?
Great photograph.
I have no words. The picture really,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful photo.
Was that at my wedding by any chance? Because we had dancing.
It was at
here.
Suresh's wedding.
Oh, Suresh's wedding.
So on the left is Raja, and next to him is his brother Mahendra. Mahendra's the boy who went to India and brought Babaji back, literally. And this is the young Raja who opened the show with a video of him talking about being with Babaji when he was 15. Raja wrote a really beautiful 6-page note about those years with Babaji, and he sent it to me, and I'm talking with Rajendra about how we can make it public, because it's just so beautiful about being a young boy in Babaji's presence and Ma Renu's involvement. So keep your eyes open on the HFS History website, which is where, or it's not website, it's YouTube, which is where the final version of this will go, and that letter. Ah. So this is a little story I have.
Oh, the Buddha.
As Ma was sort of dwindling but clearly present, I was up there one day and sitting with her and Babaji, and I had taken up a Tibetan tanka to show them, and Babaji pointed to it and said, "That's real." And then I asked about the bronze Buddha. I had heard a story about it, about it being a true story, and the book wasn't out at that time, but both of them nodded their heads, and then Ma said, "Do you want to see it?" And I said, "Yes," and she said, "It's in my bedroom." So I went in and brought it out, and they told me pretty much, well, the facts of the matter were, when she got it, when she showed it to Babaji, he turned it over and fiddled with the seal on the bottom, and this smoke came out. So that was true. They both said so.
Well, I have a Ma moment to share. It happened in the early 1980s. It was February, and in Santa Cruz in February, the weather is often cold and kind of windy and sort of damp. Even if it's not raining, it's sort of damp, or at least it was in the early 80s. I had been working on The Wings of Breath with Rajesh and Shama and a number of other people, which Wings of Breath is the first kirtan songbook that the fellowship put out. I had had some experience typesetting, so I was asked if I would go to Robles and use the typesetting equipment that they had there. In the early 80s, it was before computers, but this was a fairly sophisticated machine. So I got up early one morning. I lived at Leonard Street at that time, which Bhavani told us about earlier. Walked down to the bus station to catch the 10 o'clock bus up to Bonnie Doon. The buses only ran every 2 hours, so I had to be careful to be there on time. Got up to Robles, got off the bus, walked another mile up the hill to Ma and Babaji's house. Ma and Babaji were at Mount Madonna Center that morning, so she had left me the instructions about where to find the key, which was under the mat at the front door, of course. Let myself in. The house was chilly because they didn't really have any central heating of any kind at that point. I think, as I recall, the living room was still heated with a wood fireplace. In any event, I got to work on the computer and doing this typesetting with the songs. And after a couple hours, I made a cup of tea in the kitchen. That was very exciting to explore Ma's kitchen. Went back to work, and a couple of hours later, sometime early afternoon, Ma came home. Was her practice to drive Babaji to the center, and then someone else would drive him home after supper. She would leave early in the afternoon and go to town and do the shopping for the house, grocery shopping or whatever shopping needed to be done. So she got home about, I don't know, maybe 2:30 or 3 o'clock, and I helped her unpack the groceries and put things away. I was pretty done with typesetting by then. And by that time, it had started to rain. And I needed to catch the 4 o'clock bus back to town. And it was a mile back to the bus stop in the rain. So Ma, in her gracious way, asked me if I'd like to have a ride to the bus stop. And I said, my goodness, of course, thank you so much. And that would give me a chance to sit in Babaji's seat in her car. So yes, it was quite an honor. So anyway, we packed ourselves up and got in the car, drove down to the bus stop, and waited for the bus. And while we were sitting there, she must have been asking me some questions about what was happening in my life or because I was going on and on about something. And Ma suddenly turned to me and she said, Pratibha, remember your aim. And just at that moment, the bus came looming around the corner, and I didn't have a chance to pursue the conversation with her at all. I grabbed up my gear, got out, said thank you, and rushed to catch the bus. And of course, all the way down to town, I was like, remember your aim. It sort of was resounding in my ear, you know how that is. And I hadn't a clue what the answer to that question was. What is your aim? What is my aim? Do I have an aim? Do I need to have an aim? And it was all very confusing. So months went by, and I was still pondering, what is your aim? Do you have an aim? Do you need an aim? And then one day, it occurred to me to remember the very first question I had ever asked Babaji. It was my first trip to Salt Spring, and I was very shy of him. But he happened to be giving an interview outdoors, some magazine people. And when they were packing up their gear after the interview, without even really thinking about it, I said, Babaji, if you had only 2 words to speak to the people of the world, what would they be? And before I'd barely finished writing or speaking, he wrote, attain peace. And when I remembered that story, it answered the question that I'd been having, what is your aim? My aim is to attain peace. He told me that years ago. Mm-hmm. So I've always appreciated Ma for her, the truth from Ruth, as somebody called it. Remember your aim, Pratibha. Thank you.
Vishwanath has a story, and in case you didn't know, Vishwanath doesn't speak, so I'm going to speak for him. So it's written down. I arrived late, December 1980. I wanted to learn to find peace, and after 5 or 6 months of attending the Saturday morning introductory class in the farmhouse, I was invited and accepted into Ma's class in July 1981. This was a portal or gateway into Babaji's Saturday morning class generally intended to last about 6 to 12 months maximum, as I recall. Then the typical student moved on to Babaji's class. About 15 and a half years later, January 1997, Ma wrote me a thank you card for a small donation I'd made to Sri Ram Orphanage. In the card, she continued after thanking me, quote, "I will be coming to class on Saturday until I leave on February 9th. When we get back from India, I want you to go into Babaji's class. It is a new sadhana which you might enjoy very much. Besides, you'll have the direct influence of Babaji. Rajesh, Leela's son, and Sunil, Jai, Agiri, have already switched. See you soon. With love, Ma Renu."
Michael, can you go through these next few slides? It's her 80th birthday concrete piñata.
Yeah, we were commissioned to provide a present for Ma's 80th birthday. 80th birthday, right? Yeah. And Jagadish and I, we have a history of making outlandish presents for one another. So a lot of it had to do with dogs at the time. We were doing wolf stock, but that didn't seem appropriate for Ma. She didn't really have a dog or anything like that. So decided it was going to be a cat. And there was some confusion about what this was. It was sort of a sculpture, but it was really the container for the present. I think it was an angel cat that was going somewhere. And we did get a little bit of trouble for this because it had to be destroyed, and she was really unhappy about destroying it. So that was...
It was very
Well, it was
hard.
the container for the present. The present was inside. I do not remember the present, though.
These are the people who showed up for her 80th birthday. At some point, Ma had a heart issue, right, Sharda? And she was in the hospital for a while. And when I finally went in there, I asked her, having had a near-death experience, what did she come away with? And she said to me, "I finally got to read Owen Meany." And she didn't actually read it. Kalpana, Sharda, a bunch of the ladies would go in there. Can somebody just describe that? Sharda?
I was just noticing behind Ma all her notebooks. And Ma was a student and a scholar. And she didn't always get the time for all that she wanted, certainly not for pleasure reading. So she picked out Owen Meany, which I have to admit I did not enjoy, but others of us really enjoyed reading it and read book after book with her. So that's how she spent her time. But look at all those books behind her. Those were all things she was working on.
She did tell me about that episode in the hospital. And I remember some of us were in the waiting room just sitting around, and for some reason I got up and I looked and I could see people moving. I just said, people are moving quickly around Ma. And Babaji went in, and later I asked Ma, what happened and what did she remember? And she just said, "I just remember a velvety darkness, peace. No big light, no big story, just a velvety darkness." May I add one thing about Ma as a meditator? I got to see how she adapted as she grew older and just kept with her sadhana. She did the daily work of her sadhana with that mindfulness, but she had her practice as well. And I remember at one point she used to take walks, but the dogs got bothersome, so she decided to do this kind of combination of jumping jacks and dance moves to the Hanuman Chalisa. So she did that for a while, and then she, as her knees needed a little attention, she got someone to make these beautifully tailored meditation pillows that kept getting more and more and more of them. So she had quite the collection of meditation pillows to keep her comfortable. But I remember one morning I came, and she was standing at the glass sliding door, and it was just so absolutely apparent and remarkable that she was radiant, like extra radiant. She was filled with light, and light was all around her. And in my usual just way, I said, "Ma, what happened? You're full of light." And she just demurred. And she just said, "Well, something happened in meditation." And then we went on to do our little bit of work. But I remember Ma, she told me she wanted to be ordinary. She was reading these books by, I can't remember the Zen author, but she, people have aspirations to do things in the world, and Ma wanted to be ordinary. And she also said, she'd go to town and she said, people smile at me. Why are they smiling at me? And I just think that they probably could see that light. So I used to call Ma, I said, "Ma, you're my extraordinary, ordinary Ma."
I just think this picture, we should at least mention that this was offering Ma's ashes to the Ganga. After she passed away, Babaji had told her that he would bring her ashes to India. And you can see her family, who's here now, is there with her and a lot of us. And that was another really poignant saying goodbye to Ma in India.
For all of us who went to Robles, in that fire a few years ago, we saw this image, or we knew that it was there, that Robles completely burned. That's the fireplace in the living room. So a number of us have spoken about it, pointing out, first of all, Ma left, then Babaji left, Karuna, who lived there, left, and then the entire property burned to the ground. And that was the end of Robles.
She's floating.
When I see that photograph of Robles, just the chimney up, it brings to mind what Babaji said, that when one form changes to another form, we call it death. But the spirit never dies. And I see that in Ma, her spirit will never die.